So today we have Mr. T.K. Looi from Singapore. He has 30 years legal practice and policy expertise built on his unique dual leadership in the ASEAN Secretariat, and is a former head of Secretariat of Competition, Consumer Protection, and IP, and Assistant Director for AAC Market Integration. He's from Singapore, and I would like you to give him a warm welcome. And thank you so much for your help, sharing your knowledge and your expertise about the region to all of us. We have also Asian students, but we're waiting for them to join. We will introduce you later. Please, Mr. Looi.
Oh, thank you very much. Perhaps I could begin?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah, okay. Firstly, a very good morning to everyone. I understand that a lot of you are third and fourth year international relations students. And there are some law faculty peers as well. And of course, Professor Carlos Martin. Thank you for joining me today at Universidad Europea, Valencia. Over the next 40 minutes, I'll be diving into how ASEAN's economic blueprint is transformed from vision to enforceable reality, drawing directly from the 46th Summit in Kuala Lumpur. Okay, so as the immediate head of past head of the Competition, Consumer Protection, and IPR division at the ASEAN Secretariat, and also as what Professor Carlos mentioned, concurrently an Assistant Director for Market Integration. I've been at the heart of these policies, and currently I'm the Principal Consultant at Public Policy Asia Advisor. So I advise on post-2025 strategies, including disputes and IP rights that resonate with law students. So this talk would aligns with Professor Martin's course on international economics and financial organization. We'll explore trade liberalization's comparative advantage, WTO disputes mechanism, IMF-backed resilience in the ASEAN single market. So let's get started, and I look forward to the end of my lecture to address your Q&A. For your question and answer, please do feel free to put it into a chat box. So at the end of my lecture, I'll try to answer as much as I can. And if not, we can follow up, online.
Mr. Looi, can you do bigger? Can you, instead of sharing the other slides, because we see the.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you see the other slide?
No, now we see only your camera. We don't see the.
So which one do you see?
For the moment, only your camera.
Only my camera, I see. Okay.
Yeah, because by sharing the other slides, the big one, the main one is very small.
So okay, let me just try to share again. Have I got this right? Is this the one that I'm sharing?
Yeah, much better. Perfect.
Okay, that's perfect, right? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm into my second slide. Do you have my second slide?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. All right. So so you picture this negotiating antitrust rules that span over 680 million people, from Singapore's financial towers to Indonesia's vast markets That's what I did daily at the ASEAN Secretariat. And basically shaping policies that align TRIPS with WTO standards and boost IMF-style financial inclusions. So in my division, we enforce fair competition to prevent cartels, safeguarded consumers in e-commerce booms, and resolve IPR disputes that could derail supply chains. As Assistant Director, I drove market integration under the AEC blueprint, ensuring equitable growth amid global shocks like the pandemic. So for IR students, this is neo-functionalism in practice, spillover from security to economics. So law would be cross-border enforcement under AFAC, which is the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Competition. And on economics, you will have to deal on the issue of ADB and World Bank funding and how it turns such blueprints into 222 billion FDI inflows. Yeah, we'll start with ASEAN. In terms of the lecture agenda and objectives, we'll start with ASEAN foundations in 5 minutes, and then we'll unpack the blueprints progress over 8 minutes, spotlight the 46 summits game changer in 10 minutes, and zoom into my division's enforcement tools for another 10, address challenges and outlooks in 5, and wrap up the takeaways before a deep dive Q&A. So by the end, you'll analyze how ASEAN economic community integration leverages financial organizations like the WTO for dispute settlement and IMF for resilience metrics. So for IR students, it means how do you apply this to multipolar theories, and on law forecast IPR disputes in digital trade. So in terms of economics, the quantified post-2025 GDP boost would be about 10 trillion by 2045. So it does sound ambitious, but we'll keep it interactive. Can I just have a quick poll? Hands up if any one of you studied RCEP in Professor Martin's class. You know what RCEP is? The Regional Comprehensive Partnership, which comprises, it's basically an FTA for all the 10 ASEAN countries plus another 6 countries like China, South Korea, Japan, Australia. Okay, great. Never mind. That would be our gravity model anchor for today, right? Yeah. Well, let's start off with ASEAN. What is ASEAN, right? ASEAN is basically the association of Southeast Asian nations. And it was born in 1967, right in the thick of the Cold War tensions, as a peace pact among 5 founding members: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. So their goal is to foster stability and cooperation in a region buffeted by conflicts like Vietnam and ideological divides. So fast forward to today, and we're a robust block of 10 full members, with Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia joining progressively from 1984 to 1999. And there's an 11-member Timor-Leste. Will be fully you ascend 3 weeks or 2 weeks from now on October 26th at the 47 ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur. Now, this move would push our combined population to over 680 million people, unlocking fresh opportunities in resources and markets for deeper integration. Economically speaking, ASEAN punches as the world's 5th largest bloc, with a nominal GDP hovering around 3.8 trillion in 2024, and they've clocked a solid 4.6% growth rate that outstrips the global average of 2.8%. So you notice that it highlights a great diversity. Singapore as a bustling finance hub, funneling global investments. Juxtapose this against Myanmar's agriculture-heavy base. This mosaic perfectly illustrates the Ricardian comparative advantage at work, where labor-abundant powerhouses like Vietnam and Indonesia exports textiles and palm oil, trading seamlessly to fuel collective prosperity. Now, from an international relations perspective, ASEAN's arc exemplifies neo-functionalism. Initially, it's a security-focused spillover, forging trust to avoid wars. It has cascaded into profound economic interdependence. And it peaked with the 2015 ASEAN Economic Community launch. And linking this to Professor Martin's financial organization model, the IMF and World Bank are key backers via the Initiative for ASEAN Integration, channeling funds and know-how to narrow development chasms and sustain this upward trajectory. In fact, ASEAN has now become a very important channel for foreign direct investments coming in from Europe. And a recent survey basically shows that 70% of all the businesses in Europe feels that ASEAN is a very important source and destination for foreign investments, and it has a great impact on their bottom line as far as their businesses is concerned. Now let's have a look at the ASEAN Economic Community. So unlike the European Union, ours is basically an association of 10 countries, and it is not a customs union. These are all 10 independent countries with their own sovereign laws, and political systems. And there's no unified, unlike the EU, there's no unified parliamentary mechanism to govern how they work. So the ASEAN Economic Community was launched in 2015 as a bold single market vision for seamless trade and investment across the region. At its core are 5 interconnected pillars. You see that firstly, a highly integrated and cohesive single market and production base, where we'll liberalize trade by eliminating tariffs on over 98.6% of goods under the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, ATIGA. So fostering harmonized standards for everything from electronics to agriculture. The second column, you'll see the target is to develop a competitive economic region with robust antitrust rules. That's where my division comes in. Third is to develop an equitable development to uplift lagging members. As you know, all 10 countries, 11 countries in ASEAN varies in terms of their development, economic development, and natural resources. Fourth, we aim to have full integration into the global economy via FTAs like RCEP, which I mentioned earlier, which is the largest economic trading blocks right now in the world. And fifth, a resilient, innovative model bolstered by financial links such as the ASEAN +3 bond market initiative. This facilitates cross-border capital flows to fund everything from green bonds to digital infrastructure. Now, these ambitions don't happen in isolation. Global financial organizations are vital partners. So you would have learned that WTO provides the backbone for dispute settlement under GATT, ensuring fair play in trade rows, while Asian Development Bank has poured in substantial funding, committing over $50 billion cumulatively over the years for infrastructure projects that connect our markets, all our 10 or 11 countries. And the payoff, foreign direct investments inflows have soared to a record $230 billion in 2023, drawing tech giants and manufacturers alike, which is why ASEAN is a very attractive place for foreign direct investments for the EU, especially in today's geopolitical climates. So in Professor Martin's cost terms, the AEC, the ASEAN Economic Community, operationalizes the Heckscher-Ohlin theorem. Basically what it means is that countries leverage abundant factors like Vietnam's vast labor pool to drive textile and electronic exports, while IMF resilient metrics, honed from post-global financial crisis reforms, guide our buffer against shocks, turning theoretical trade gains into tangible regional prosperity. That vision in motion. Next, the global pressures testing it. Now, why does the AEC matter right here, right now in this volatile world? As I mentioned, amid escalating US-China rivalry and trade fragmentation, in part caused also by Trump's tariffs, ASEAN is positioning itself as a resilient hub. So our Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, as I mentioned, which is the globe's largest FTA, covering 30% of world GDP, is a prime shield, with utilization rates for some members like Japan and Korea hitting around 50%, while overall intra-regional trade has surged up to 15 to 20% in key economies, such as Laos and Indonesia since 2022. So effectively buffering against external tariffs and protectionist headwinds. So ASEAN's economy is forecasted to grow 4.2% in 2025. This handily outpaced the global average of 3.2%. So while WIPO, which is World Intellectual Property Organization, reports show IP disputes in digital realm exploding amid AI and e-commerce booms, with intangible asset investments tripling in pace over 2024 alone. So think rampant online counterfeiting in our $3.8 trillion market. So how might WTO panels step in to resolve ASEAN-US tariff spats? We'll unpack that in AFEX role shortly for you law students. It's pure gold in extraterritorial enforcement, especially as digital IP routes intensify. Now let's go on to the blueprint that powers this resilience. With the AEC's vision set, enter the AEC ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint 2025. Now, the strategic engine room adopted back in November 2016 by ASEAN economic ministers right after the 2015 AEC launch. It is basically a comprehensive 10-year roadmap to turn those grand goals into measurable actions. So its structured timeline keeps us accountable. A midterm review that was due and conducted in 2020 during my time in ASEAN Secretariat assessed early progress. It revealed about 52% implementation. While the end-term review, which was finalized just this January 2025, we noted that it has clocked in over 70% achievement. It has paved the way strategic 2026 to 2030 strategic plan. So at the blueprint's core stand 5 interlocking pillars. You see that in the slides. Well, firstly, the target is to build a highly integrated single market and production base for seamless trade and services. So you got to think about tariff-free flows and mutual recognition agreements. This is to basically facilitate intra-ASEAN trade. Second, to forge a competitive economic region through antitrust frameworks, like the ones which I champion. Third, driving equitable economic development to narrow gaps via initiatives like the Integration ASEAN Development. So fourth, deeper integration with the global economy through FTAs. And fifth, cultivating a resilient, innovative, and competitive ASEAN, emphasizing sustainability and technology. So the key targets include substantially enhancing intra-ASEAN trade, as I mentioned. These are the projected boost will be up to 15% in targeted sectors by slashing non-tariff barriers like redundant standards and custom delays. Now, this blueprint truly embodies international economics classics like the gravity model of trade, where proximity and market size propel flows. Our shared borders and 3.8 trillion combined make integration irresistible. Plus, the WTO's ongoing moratorium on e-commerce duties extended through 2026 supercharged the digital pillar by keeping online transmission duty-free, fueling cross-border e-sales. So these are seamless stuff. Next, how do we measure these midterm wins? I mentioned earlier that after 5 years, you do a midterm review of our blueprint. So let's spotlight this midterm review And as I mentioned, it evaluated the first 5 years and found a solid 52.5% strategic measures, either fully implemented or substantially on track with notable strides in core areas like trade facilitation and connectivity. Some of the highlights of the wins includes upgrades to the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, which incorporated e-commerce protocols for smoother digital goods flows, alongside progress in service liberalization under the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Services, where commitments now cover over 100 subsectors, with liberalization rates exceeding 60% in key areas like logistics and finance. Financial organizations played a starring role here. The ASEAN Development Bank's ASEAN Infrastructure Fund alone has built a $3 billion portfolio since 2012, accelerating connectivity through projects in transport and energy that bridge gaps across borders. Yet challenges linger. SME digitization hovers at just 30 to 40% adoption in many members, as per recent assessment. And this is not surprising because the bulk of SMEs in ASEAN are in the rural and suburban areas. But there are also some bright spots like remittances, which held steady at around 80 billion in 2020 despite COVID headwinds, underscore the human capital fueling our markets. So from a law perspective, aligning standards with WTO rules has been a game changer, helping curb potential trade disputes by promoting transparency and mutual recognition. During my secretariat tenure, we directly saw this prevent spikes in consumer fraud cases tied to mismatched regulations. So how did the anthem? So what was the anthem? The anthem review of the AEC blueprint, which was spearheaded by the high-level task force on economic integration, was finalized in early 2025. It delivers a comprehensive audit of the 2016 to 2025 period, and it reveals over 70% of the strategic measures that have been achieved or substantially advanced. This was a marked leap from the midterm 52%. So this SWOT, the SWOT frame, which you see in the screen, assessment laid out in that matrix on the slide, spotlight strengths in robust institutional frameworks and trade liberalization tools, like harmonized standards that slash clearance times, while pinpointing weaknesses in enforcement gaps, where uneven implementation across members hampers full spillover effects. So these successes are nothing short of transformative. Tariff elimination under ARTIGA now covers 98% of goods, turbocharging intra-ASEAN trade with a whopping 540 billion uplift, while extra-regional flows ballooned by $1.4 trillion, fueled by RCEP's stellar uptake, driving an overall 11% trade surge worth 3.3 trillion, and an 8% investment boost over the decade. Picture this. ASEAN's GDP rocketed from 2.5 trillion in 2015 to 3.9 trillion in 2024 at 5.1% annual clip, adding 1.1 trillion in value, equivalent to 5% direct blueprint attribution, while creating 4 million jobs and hiking wages by 5% or $16 monthly per worker. FDI doubled to 226 billion, with intra-ASEAN shares hitting 13.9%, underscoring investor faith in our integrated market. Yet gaps persist, testing our resolve. Development divides linger, as I mentioned, with CLMV, which is Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, states trailing in digital access and green tech, echoing World Bank urgings for scale-up inclusive finance to democratize benefits, think targeted MSME lending via ADB channels. Enforcement lacks in sustainability too, with carbon intensity rising despite renewables pushes. These aren't roadblocks, but rallying cries for the post-2025 plan. Quantified impacts like this, they prove the blueprint's gravity now. Let's chart its economic ripples. Now, these aren't just policy checkboxes. They are economic dynamite. Gaze at that line graph. Intra-ASEAN trade has ballooned by over 15% cumulatively since 2016, from roughly 550 billion to 760 billion by 2024, with the Anthem review attributing a direct 7% uplift to overall GDP growth, pushing our bloc's total from 2.5 trillion in 2015 to a powerhouse 3.9 trillion last year at a blistering 5.1% annual average. That's a 1.1 trillion in added value, equivalent to 5% straight from blueprint measures like tariff cut and standards harmonization, creating, as I mentioned earlier, 4 million jobs and uplifting average wages by 5%, or about $16 monthly per worker, as per the high-level task force calculus. Financially, the ASEAN Bond Framework, or ABF, has been a linchpin linking stock markets and channeling over 300 billion in sustainable bonds since 2016 for stable cross-border flows, cushioning shocks from global volatility. Broader ripples, the ASEAN Comprehensive Investment Agreement, or ACIA, streamlines disputes resolution, slashing investor risk, and enabling smoother capital inflows, vital for IR students eyeing multipolarity, where ASEAN's resilience turn great power jostling into opportunity, not threat. So drawing from my frontline days as Assistant Director for Market Integration, I witnessed non-tariff barriers reduction firsthand. One push in logistics/paperwork delays, saving MSMEs millions in sunk costs. Think a Thai exporter dodging $500,000 in redundant fees annually. These are pure Ricardian comparative advantage. Low barrier specialization lets Vietnam's factories feed Singapore's hubs, amplifying everyone's pie. These impacts, they are the blueprint's legacy, priming us for the summit's next chapter. So pivoting from the blueprint's triumphs, let's spotlight the pivotal 46th ASEAN Summit, which was convened recently on May 26-27, 2025, in the vibrant heart of Kuala Lumpur under Malaysia's dynamic chairmanship. A fitting host for this milestone gathering, all 10 heads of state and government convened in person, underscoring a renewed commitment to face-to-face diplomacy amid hybrid challenges, with the overarching theme of inclusivity and sustainability, weaving through every dialogue from economic resilience to climate action. This summit wasn't just ceremonial, it delivered concrete momentum, most notably through the endorsement of 18 Priority Economic Deliverables, or PEDs, tailored by Malaysia to supercharge regional integration. Spanning economy, security, and innovation, these PEDs target enhancing trade and investment via Artiga upgrades, forging inclusive and sustainable pathways for MSMEs and vulnerable groups, and bolstering integration through digital connectivity and green infrastructure, like advancing the ASEAN power grid for renewable energy sharing. Convened at a critical post-blueprint juncture, the summit marked the seamless handoff from the 2025 Anthem Review to the new 2026 to 2030 strategic plan, all the while navigating IMF-flagged global slowdowns, with projections dipping to 3.2% world growth amid tariffs and geopolitical frays. Yet the focus remained laser-sharp on unity and growth. Leaders recommitted to ASEAN centrality, launching the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on ASEAN 2045, our shared future, to propel us towards a $10 trillion economy by mid-century, blending innovation with equitable progress. So as Secretary General Dr. Kheong Kim Horn noted post-summit, these outcomes fortify our bloc against fragmentation, turning challenges into collaborative wins, a high watermark. Now let's dive into that landmark declaration. Emerging from the 46th Summit's deliberations, the crown jewel was the signing of the KL Kuala Lumpur Declaration on ASEAN 2045. Our shared future was inked on May 26 by all 10 leaders. It was a visionary blueprint charting our region's path to mid-century. At its heart, the declaration adopts the ASEAN Community Vision 2045, aspiring to resilient, innovative, dynamic, and people-centered ASEAN that stands as the epic center of growth in the Indo-Pacific, united by solidarity and adaptive to mega trends like digital transformation and climate shift. This isn't pie in the sky, it's anchored in bold economic targets to supercharge prosperity, scaling our collective GDP from today's $3.9 trillion to $10 trillion by 2030. And that's just 5 years away. And a staggering $12 trillion by 2045, alongside growing the ASEAN market to $6 trillion, intra-regional trade to $4.5 trillion, and attracting $3 trillion in FDI, all while capturing 15% of global trade share. So green innovation is the engine here. Think renewables, powering the ASEAN power grid, and AI-driven MSME tools, ensuring sustainable, inclusive growth that leaves no one behind. To operationalize this, the declaration tasks economic ministers and coordinating bodies with crafting and updating strategic plans across the 3 ASEAN pillars: the political, security, economic, and social cultural, plus connectivity, succeeding the 2025 blueprint and integrating IAI Work Plan 5. It aligns seamlessly with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, embedding sustainability in every dimension, from equitable opportunities, which is SDG 8 and 10, to environmental resilience, SDG 13, bolstered by resource mobilization from members and partners like the ASEAN Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, for funding green infrastructure. So tying back to Prof. Martin's models, this embodies endogenous growth theory. Innovation isn't imported, it's homegrown through R&D and knowledge spillovers, driving long-term prosperity as our human capital and tech ecosystem amplify returns. A forward leap. Now the summit's economic deliverables that make it real. Delving deeper into the summit's engine, the 18 priority economic deliverables, or PEDs, endorsed by our leaders in 2025 May as Malaysia's chairmanship flagship to propel the post-blueprint era. These targeted actions span trade enhancement, digital acceleration, and sustainable infrastructure, directly addressing global headwinds while amplifying intra-regional synergies. What are the standouts? The standouts among the PEDs include upgrades to the ASEAN Trade in Goods Agreement, or ATIGA, and the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area, AFTA 3.0, both concluded in May and slated for October signatures, which will slash non-tariff barriers through streamlined customs and digital provisions, projected to boost intra-ASEAN trade by up to 10% by harmonizing rules on e-commerce and green standards. Another powerhouse, advancing the ASEAN Power Grid Framework as mapped on the slide to interconnect renewable across borders. Following the August ministerial interface, this PED eyes 20 billion in funding for cross-border lines, aiming at 35% renewable integration by 2030 and energy security for 670 million people. On trade, the summit deepened RCEP commitments, tasking ministers to modernize rules for deeper alignment, open to new members like the UK, while leveraging its 30% global GDP heft to mitigate uncertainties, with utilization rates climbing 15% year-on-year. So echoing this, ASEAN reaffirmed a non-retaliatory stance on tariff, prioritizing WTO dialogues over countermeasures amid US hikes to safeguard $3.3 trillion of FDI inflows. So for law students, these PEDs ripple into dispute settlement understanding. AFEX, the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Competition, which is signed on September 23rd, which is our first regional competition pact, builds WTO-aligned enforcement for cross-border cartels, harmonizing policies to preempt DSU escalation and foster fair market. Now let's have a look at the broader summit's wider waves. What are the broader summit's wider impacts? Beyond the core deliverables, the 46th summit rippled into expansive horizons. Firstly, we start with Timor-Leste's long-awaited full membership, now locked in for formal affirmation at the 47th summit in October 26, 2025, which is about 10 days away. Expanding ASEAN to 11 nations and injecting fresh vitality with Timor-Leste's untapped resources like offshore, oil, gas reserves, and marine biodiversity. This inclusion not only swells our market to 700 million consumers, but fosters deeper economic ties, channeling World Bank-backed development to bridge Timor-Leste's lower middle income status into regional growth engines like tourism and fisheries. Sustainability took center stage too. Gaze at that pie chart, breaking down ASEAN's bold climate pledges. A collective 30% cut in greenhouse gas emissions from the energy sector by 2030, benchmark against 2020 levels, powered by the Just Transition Fund, a collaborative pot seeded by IMF and ADB contributions to reskill workers and fund renewables, ensuring equitable shifts from fossil fuels without leaving communities behind. On risk, the summit birthed the ASEAN Geo-Economic Task Force, an ad hoc high-level advisory powerhouse to dissect supply chain vulnerabilities amid Trump-era tariffs and US-China frays, coordinating policies for resilient diversification and trade buffers. These impacts, they weave inclusivity into action, priming the AEC strategic plan ahead. So crowning the summit's forward thrust is the AEC strategic plan 2026 to 2020. So this was formally adopted on May 26 as the economic pillar of the ASEAN Community Vision 2045. They succeeded the blueprint with a laser-focused blueprint for the next phase. This robust framework outlines 6 strategic goals spanning deeper integration, resilience, sustainability, innovation, inclusivity, and global connectivity, underpinned by 44 precise objectives and a whopping 192 actionable measures, all designed to propel ASEAN toward that $10 trillion GDP horizon by 2045. At its core, the plan champions a resilient green economy through measures like scaling renewables to 35% of energy mix by 2030 via the power grid, while turbocharging digital MSMEs with DFAS, which is the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, full rollout, targeting 70% adoption rates to unlock $300 billion in e-commerce value, empowering 70 million small firms with cross-border tools and fintech access. It's people-centered too, weaving in AI enhancement for equitable growth. Seamlessly, it harmonizes with the WTO's joint statement initiatives on e-commerce, embedding digital trade rules that align with global moratoriums and plurilateral pacts, ensuring duty-free data flows boost our $1 trillion digital economy. Echoing IRAYA's pre-summit recommendation, the plan's aims institutional boost, like stronger secretariat capacity and monitoring mechanisms to close enforcement gaps and track progress via annual scorecards. A roadmap to reality. Now, insights from a secretariat front lines. Now, shifting from the grand strategies to the gritty enforcement that makes them stick. So from 2019 to 2022, I headed the competition, consumer protection, market integration, and intellectual property rights division at the ASEAN Secretariat, which is a powerhouse unit overseeing the fair play pillars of our single market. Antitrust to curb cartels and monopolies, consumer safeguards against fraud in booming e-commerce, market access facilitation to slash non-tariff barriers, and IPR enforcement to protect innovations under TRIPS-aligned rules. So under my watch, we drove key milestones by finalizing the ASEAN Consumer Protection Handbook, second edition in 2021, also ensuring that all 10 members have enacted the relevant national laws for the first time, and advancing the ASEAN Competition Action Plan through 2025, which harmonized principles across 80% of members by the blueprint's end. This contributed to the overall 70% achievement in blueprint's targets for equitable markets, from AFAC negotiations to IPR cooperation pacts that cut border disputes by 15%. The work was all hands-on, coordinating with national authorities to align laws, mediating e-commerce IP routes, crafting tools like the MSME verification system, turning blueprint ambitions into enforceable reality for 680 million consumers. Post-Secretariat, I've transitioned to Principal Consultant at Public Policy Asia Advisors, where I now specialize in resolving high-stakes disputes and crafting sustainable trade strategies, advising post-2025 green IP frameworks and WTO-compliant competition audits to keep ASEAN agile in multipolar winds. So that's Insider Edge. It's yours today. Next, the antitrust in depth. Now, zooming into one of my division's crowning achievement and the direct post-summit win is the ASEAN Framework Agreement on Competition, or AFAC, which was officially signed on September 23rd, 2025 in Kuala Lumpur, which was only just last month, during the 57th ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting, just 4 months after the 46th Leaders Summit. This landmark pact establishes the region's first binding cross-border rules on cartel, mergers, and anti-competitive practices, empowering cooperation among national authorities to investigate and penalize violations that span borders. Think joint probes into regional supply chain monopolies, while aligning seamlessly with international standards like GATT's anti-dumping provision under Article 6, ensuring WTO compatibility and fair global trade. The impacts are already rippling. Take Vietnam's National Competition Commission, which in September 24 slapped aggregate fines of Vietnamese dong 1.42 billion, about 54,000 US dollar, on multiple firms for cartel activities in the industrial sector. A case guided by emerging ASEAN principles that help streamline evidence sharing and deterred similar bids elsewhere. Early data from the ASEAN Competition Action Plan shows such harmonized enforcement has reduced cross-border disputes by around 20% in pilot sectors, fostering trust and efficiency. For you law students, AFAC's extraterritorial reach is a masterclass, allowing one member's authority to assist another's investigation without sovereignty clashes, much like EU competition law, but tailored for our diverse bloc. I led those marathon negotiations from 2020 through the signing, wrangling 10 jurisdictions to consensus on thresholds for merger notification and cartel penalties, directly preventing dominance in our 3.8 trillion market, where unchecked giants could stifle MSMEs and innovation. It's a game changer for equitable growth. Next, let's have a look at the consumer safeguards in action. Now, this is a linchpin of trust in our single market. The ASEAN Strategic Action Plan for Consumer Protection, or ASAP-CP, 2021 to 2025 has been our guiding compass. With a pivotal refresh via the ASEAN Capacity Building Roadmap for Consumer Protection 2025, launched this year to map out targeted training and resources based on a comprehensive needs assessment across members. This roadmap complements the ASPCP by prioritizing cross-border redress mechanisms like streamlined complaints portals or transnational scams, and robust e-commerce safeguards, including data privacy protocols and fake product crackdowns, ensuring shoppers from Jakarta to Manila enjoy equal protection in the digital age. Now, progress is tangible. By mid-2025, all 10 members have enshrined comprehensive national consumer protection laws, up from patchy coverage pre-2021, hitting over 80% alignment with ASEAN standards for enforcement and awareness. The ASEAN Consumer Empowerment Index, or ACEI, our annual gauge of consumer savvy and rights awareness, jumped to 65% in the latest 2024 readout, reflecting empowered users who report issues 30% faster thanks to regional hotlines and apps. Wins abounds, especially post-COVID. Coordinated crackdowns dismantled cross-border fraud rings, recovering millions in illicit gains, while our framework now shield the $98 billion in annual remittance flowing through ASEAN corridors, vital lifelines for 10 million migrant workers, protected against predatory fees and scams via verified channels. This, of course, dovetails with IMF goals for financial inclusion, as highlighted in their Financial Access Survey and Open Finance Guidelines, safeguarding vulnerable groups like low-income remitters through consumer-centric regulations that boost access without exploitation, fostering resilient households amid economic flux. From blueprint to bedside protection, next with the market integration engines. So market integration initiatives under my former purview have been the turbochargers for ASEAN single market. These tools dissolve barriers and unlock efficiencies for businesses big and small. Leading the pack is the ASEAN Unique Business Identification Number, or UBIN, a game-changing digital ID system rolled out via the 2024 implementation roadmap, now live in pilot phases across 6 members as of early 2025. UBIN verifies MSME's legitimacy in real time. Partners can cross-check credentials instantly via a shared registry, slashing verification times from weeks to hours and building trust for seamless cross-border deals. This could unlock up to $300 billion in trade value by empowering 70 million MSMEs with transparent onboarding from Thai exporters to Indonesian startups. Complementing that, the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, or DEFA, negotiations kick off in December 2023 and on track for conclusion by end of this year, sets pioneering region-wide rules for digital trade, data flows, and e-commerce governance, projected to halve non-tariff barriers in the digital realm through mutual recognition and open standards. It's our anchor for $1 trillion digital economy, fostering inclusive access for 680 million users. Economically, this embodies Stolper-Samuelson dynamics. Deeper integration reallocates factors, creating winners in capital-intensive finance hubs like Singapore, where streamlined rules amplify returns on tech investments, while labor-rich members gain from expanded exports. So from my secretariat vantage, this initiative saves firms millions in red tape, pure trade theory alive. On to now to IPR's protective shields. Wrapping up my division's toolkit, let's shine on intellectual property rights, the invisible fuel for ASEAN's innovation engine via the ASEAN IPR Action Plan 2016 to 2025. This is a decade-long blueprint adopted to forge a robust regional IP ecosystem aligned with global norms. Progress has been steady, with advanced harmonization of national laws and policies with TRIPS agreement standards under WTO, with all 10 members now boasting IP offices equipped for streamlined patent and trademark filings. WIPO alone backed 37 of our 57 deliverables, boosting enforcement capacity by over 60% through training and tech transfer. Regional courts like Thailand's Central Intellectual Property and International Trade Court have led the charge. Since 2021, they resolve cases 15-20% faster with specialized benches, cutting overall IP disputes by an estimated 10% through efficient mediation and border measures, as per USTR's 2025 watch list not to sustain reforms. A highlight, in May 8 to 9, 2025, workshop in Singapore during the 75th ASEAN Working Group on Intellectual Property Cooperation, which I have chaired several times during my tenure, was our third and final push, where we finalized the ASEAN IPR Action Plan 2026 to 2030, embedding AI governance and green tech protection to sustain momentum post-blueprint. What are the real-world stakes? EV supply chains are ground zero for thefts. Think Chinese firms evading IP via assembly lines, as in the August 2025 WTO ruling, where the EU triumphed in the DS 630 against subsidies masking tech pilferage, underscoring the dispute settlement understanding role in enforcing TRIPS and halting $1 billion in losses. From my division days, coordinating these responses, IP isn't bureaucracy. It's a spark for innovation economics, channeling endogenous growth by safeguarding R&D in high-tech sectors like EVs, where protected patents drive 20% higher FDI. The vital guardrails now, the challenges ahead. So let's have a look at what are the challenges ahead, the geo-economic risk. Even as ASEAN surges ahead, geo-economic headwinds loom large, testing our resilience in profound ways. Foremost is the accelerating US-China decoupling, amplified by the Trump administration 2025 tariff regime. It's slamming ASEAN export with reciprocal duties up to 40% on key sectors, like electronic and textiles, disrupting 3.3 trillion in regional flows, and slowing global trade reconfiguration. While the US overtook China as our top export market in 2024, Chinese firms are repositioning in Southeast Asia. Exports to ASEAN hits 434 billion in early 2025, up 14.7%. Yet this China plus one scramble risk supply chain snarls and erodes our neutral gains from RCEP. Compounding this, the Initiative for ASEAN Integration, IAI, grapples with funding shortfalls to bridge the CLMV divides as Work Plan 4 wraps in 2025, having delivered just $442.87 million across 133 projects. Experts urge IMF scale infusion like the recent $8 billion low-income package to scale infrastructure and digital access, lest gaps widen amid post-blueprint transitions. So digital IPR disputes are spiking too. WIPO notes a 25% surge in e-commerce cases, fueled by AI-generated content and vulnerabilities exposed in our $1 trillion bound digital economy by 2030, demanding DFA safeguards against theft in EV chains and online fakes. These pressures test ASEAN centrality, our consensus-driven neutrality, amid great power phrased as a new geo-economic task force grapples with tariff storms and eroded multilateralism. Through Prof. Martin's financial organization lens, IMF and WTO buffers are key to reclaiming the narratives, rallying for tomorrow's outlook. So what is the future outlook, the post-2025 resilience? Peering beyond 2025, ASEAN's horizon gleams with a promise. A green-powered ascent to $10 trillion in collective GDP by 2045, as enshrined in the Kuala Lumpur's Declaration Vision 2045, where sustainability isn't an add-on but a core driver. Channeling renewables and circular economies to capture 15% of global trade, while slashing emissions 30% via the Just Transition Fund. Imagine ASEAN as the Indo-Pacific Green Vanguard, our power grid interconnecting solar farms from Vietnam to Laos, backed by 20 billion in blended finance, turning climate vulnerabilities into $300 billion in bioeconomy value by 2030. Innovation anchors these too. The ASEAN Guide on AI Governance and Ethics, formalized in 2025 and rolled out post-summits, declares a safe AI ecosystem with ethical guardrails, risk assessments and cross-border data flows to harness AI's $1 trillion potential without the pitfalls, fostering interoperability as IRAIA urges for standards that close knowledge gaps and manage ecosystems. Deepening ties with financial giants seals the deal. ADB and AIIB's renewed collaboration, announced in 2025, pools resources for ASEAN infrastructure. Think 50 billion pipelines for digital and green projects, ensuring inclusive growth as ADB strategies target MSMEs and vulnerable chains. My advice, we should champion flexible treaties in this multipolar ways. Adaptable pacts like DFA that bend without breaking, fueling your thesis on resilient regionalism. So there are bright days ahead. So coming to the end, what are the lessons for your toolkits? So the lessons for international economics. Let's distill some key lessons for international economics, tailored to Prof. Martin's framework, where theory meets ASEAN's real-world grind. First, the gravity model stands proven. Recent panel analysis, like a 2025 study on intra-ASEAN flows over 17 years, confirm that economic size and proximity propel trade. Our shared borders and $3.9 trillion have driven 15% intra-regional surges, validating the model's predictions amid RCEP's pool. Second, WTO and IMF emerged as indispensable enablers. The WTO's 2025 annual report underscores tariff profiles, aiding our non-tariff barriers cuts, while IMF's April 2025 regional outlook hails ASEAN's 4.1% growth resilience against tensions backed by the funding for inclusive finance that buffers shock and deepens integration. Third, AFEC exemplifies soft laws win. Signed September 23, 2025, this pact's harmonized rules and cross-border probes are already fostering governance, reducing enforcement gaps, and signaling integrity for global ministers. It's a foundation for fairer markets and deeper ties. So it's a hands-on policy immersion from drafting AFECs to gravity testing trade sims. So let us go to the last slide. So what are the key takeaways and call to action? To wrap our dive into ASEAN's economic odyssey, let's crystallize the gems. The AEC Blueprint 2025 delivered over 70% progress through enforceable tools like AFEC and DIFA, transforming visions into 1.1 trillion in added GDP and 4 million jobs via seamless markets. The 46th Summit's Kuala Lumpur Declaration of ASEAN 2045 seals a resilient trade future, green, innovative, 10 trillion strong by mid-century, with RCEP and power grid as anchors against global norms. So what could you all do further? You can dive into the chairman's statement from the 46th Summit. It's a gold mine on their priority economic deliverables. And these are freely available on the ASEAN website. And you can also check the Blueprint Review and Strategic Plan as well, 2026 to 2030. And I think there's also other websites on X as well, on ASEAN. And you can apply all this into your IRA models for multipolar resilience, law thesis on AFEC disputes, and econ forecast. So that basically concludes my presentation. And I've also included my LinkedIn QR code, which you could scan in the event if you have questions or any queries, and we can actually carry this conversation further. Thank you very much, Professor Carlos, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Looi. If you don't mind, I will create a group on LinkedIn with all of the students that I have already in my LinkedIn account. So I will introduce you to all of them through LinkedIn. If you want to join directly, up to you. You choose. So thank you so much for this insightful presentation. There are so many details. I have so many questions, but it's the time for the students. If you have any question, please. Yes, you have. Gaia, it's a question from Italy. It's important to emphasize the country.
Okay. Does China have any interest in ASEAN? And it's composed of, because it's composed of, like, let's say, weaker political countries compared to China. And do you think that China is boosting in exports to ASEAN, creating a risk supply chain, like you had mentioned, is to, like, they're doing this to have a bigger role in ASEAN, a bigger influence?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think it's an absolutely important question because, of course, looking from the perspective from the European angle and looking at it from the ASEAN angle, I think we may have different perspective. For the ASEAN region, China and India, they have been the predominant economy impacting the growth in our region for many, many years. Yeah, and historically has gone back to several dynasties. And our history has gone back to many hundreds of years where China and India were at that point in time leading economies of the world until not so recent, like 200 years ago, when the Industrial Revolution and the US came into the picture. And basically, because of the technological advancement, literally raced ahead and became and of course, after having, having won the Cold War, become the main unipolar power in mind. China historically have a very good and strong influence in the development of our region in ASEAN. So it is not a policy it is not a recent policy when they came over to support. They have been trading in our area for the last several hundred and maybe even 1,000 years. So there's very strong ties. And the Asians, the ASEAN countries also have a very strong, population with Chinese ethnicities coming from the region. And like for example, in Malaysia, you have easily out of a 30 million population, I think there are easily about 10 million Chinese individuals with Chinese ethnicity. Likewise, too in Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and also in Singapore as well. So as far as the contribution, economic contribution into ASEAN, it's just a natural flows. And but because of the geopolitics that's happening right now, for the last 30 years, China actually was having a boom, and they were growing very, very fast. And in fact, the direction of the investment was actually coming from ASEAN into China, because that's where the real growth was. And it's only because of the recent tension, geopolitical tension, and also policies, technological policies, making it difficult for businesses to carry out manufacturing and investment in both sides. ASEAN has suddenly become much more important. And so investments from China, which could not go to US, or they are finding their ways into ASEAN. Like for example, a lot has spilled over into Vietnam. So the CLMV region, the Indo-Chinese region, have benefited a lot because of the movement of such industries into the region here. But they also spill over to the rest of ASEAN as well. So likewise too in the European and American side, because of the geopolitics, perhaps the direction of those businesses into China could have been curtailed, or it could have been made more difficult, maybe because also due to the tariffs which have been recently imposed. ASEAN, because of their strategic neutrality as a matter of policy, have attracted a lot of, have actually attracted the interest of many regional players to want to come over here to invest. And we are actually riding on this renewed interest in our region. And that has been sort of incorporated into the next 5-year strategic action plan with the intention of achieving the $10 trillion GDP by 5 years. So technically speaking, my answer to your question is yes, China is investing, and probably there's a lot of renewed interest in this region as well. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I do a connected question because Mr. Looi, you mentioned the FDI coming from Europe. If do you have the information about what is the percentage of when I'm talking of Europe, I guess we are talking about European Union plus UK, right? So and because there is a new agreement and incorporation on the talks on the treaties, the UK. I hope I'm not talking about your question, right? Yeah. Okay. Because I'm talking about UK. So what is the weight of the FDI coming from Europe to ASEAN? Is growing? Has the same weight? than 10 years ago? Or what is your opinion about this new, or if it's new, influence of European on the area?
Well, I think historically, the sources of FDI inflows to ASEAN has been growing over the years. So it has been growing at a pace which also varies depending on the situation of the world. I think if you are looking back, say about 7 years ago, in terms of the numbers and compared to where we are today, there's probably a difference of maybe $6 to $8 billion of continued growth. So the fluctuation is probably also due because of, take for example, COVID-19, right? COVID-19 impacted our region between 2020 to about 2022. So that's about a period of about 2 or 3 years, which have slowed down such investment. But in terms of the numbers, and I could actually follow up with more details to you, but in terms of the numbers, the reason why the EU are also looking towards ASEAN is partly because of recent developments, recent geopolitical developments emanating primarily from the US. Firstly is the tariffs which have been imposed. And basically what that means is the tariffs would make it more competitive or less competitive for European products to the US market. So obviously what that means is there's always a need to buffer and to spread out the risk. And spreading out the risk is basically a very, it's economic prudence, especially in a volatile geopolitical situation. So your question is whether there have been an increase. There's definitely been a very strong interest. In fact, today there was a report, and I can share the report with you in our article, TV. I think there's a report which says that 70% or 80% of European businesses feel that their bottom lines are going to be affected if they do not take into account the development and the economic development and the business opportunities in ASEAN. So that itself is a very strong indicator of the interest that is coming and going to happen in the future. So the European interest is very critical right now. And in terms of the EU-ASEAN FTAs, as you know, EU and ASEAN, they try to develop FTAs, but it's not an easy process. So a lot of bilateral FTAs have already been developed within several countries, and these have paved the way for further incoming FDIs coming into our region. And I myself have came across a couple of very important projects, the EU-ASEAN Sustainable Investment Projects, the EU-China Digital Project, which basically reflects the interest of EU in ensuring that the region here have sustainable investment criteria, which is aligned with the Green Deal and the European principles of sustainability. And we are looking at huge amounts that is being looked into, because a lot of monies are going to come into this region, but there's also a need to ensure that this region has the best international standards when it comes to sustainable finance criteria is concerned. So work is still ongoing. Interest is very strong, and EU definitely is looking into this area. And historically, EU and ASEAN have got very strong ties as well. So there's a lot of our political infrastructure have got European, we've got European influence as well. Yeah.
If you share with us these two projects within the group I'm going to create on LinkedIn. Now we have a question from UK, Ms. Daman.
Thank you very much for the talk. I know you spoke about some of the problems facing ASEAN, And I was just wondering, what do you think the main threat is to ASEAN's sustainable economic growth as we enter an unpredictable future for international relations?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question. During the Cold War, ASEAN had purposefully and intentionality a strategic neutrality policy. So as a result of which they do not engage in the tension between the two big superpowers during the Cold War, which is the Soviet Union then and the US. So, and ASEAN also, one or two of the ASEAN member states also understand the price that they can pay if they do not get their policies right in the geopolitics. So in fact, the main threats in terms of the geo-economic growth in ASEAN is going to be geopolitical. How they are going to cope and move and strategize in an arena where the new geopolitics plays out in the world. There's, of course, a lot of tension on the ASEAN countries because of strong ties with China, strong ties with the US, that there'll be a lot of tension and pressure to try to make them choose a side. Now, historically, they know, and they already had a precedent, that if you use strategic neutrality, you not only ride through the difficult tension in geopolitics, big powers, politics of big powers, imperialism, so some may call it, but you can also sustain growth throughout those periods where the tension has been experienced around other parts of the world. So likewise, this time around, with this new geopolitics which has taken place between China and the US and with their respective allies, ASEAN is going to adopt a strategic neutrality approach as they did previously in order to ride through the rough spots. But of course, the answer to your question is, what are the threats? Those are the main threats. And as long as we can remain strategically neutral, we are going to pull in a lot of businesses coming from all the other countries which could not trade or could not deal with each other because of the geopolitics. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Vijay, you have questions? Please, question from Russia.
Yes, so I wanted to ask about Russian and Asian trade. So ever since the war in Ukraine, obviously Russia has decreased its trade, well, blocked pretty much, from Europe and has increased its sales with especially China and Asian countries. And I wanted to know if how big the increase is and if it's going to continue growing.
Well, when the Russian-Ukraine war happened in, I think it was 2022, which is about almost 3 years ago, we did a analysis of how our economy is going to be impacted as a result of the Ukraine-Russian war, and we felt that it did not quite impact us in a major way overall, economically, because well, partly because our economy is, well, firstly, there's the distance, right? There's the distance. Maybe there were supply chain disruption which have taken place, but a lot of these supply chain disruptions could be replaced and reconnected and rewired. As far as the Russian and ASEAN trade is concerned, and of course, there are issues about sanctions. So the sanctions itself, it's also confined to those areas of business which could lead to enhancing or contributing to the war. So so insofar where their sanctions are concerned, those activities would probably be constrained. But insofar as the presence of Russian businesses and even the embassies are concerned, I think they are still very much in the region. And in fact, if you were to look at the recent BRICS, the BRICS summit, where even some ASEAN countries have expressed, and in fact, a few of them are actually members and also partners, strategic partners of the BRICS collaboration. So this basically explains why the region itself they have their own strategic interests to pursue, whilst at the same time acknowledging the larger strategic the strategic national interest, while at the same time acknowledging the strategic regional interest that they need to balance out as well. So, like for example, I think Indonesia, Malaysia, I think even Vietnam have expressed interests, and in fact, I think Indonesia is actually a partner of BRICS. Malaysia have attended a few of the summits. Singapore, of course, have got a different approach as far as the Russian-Ukraine war is concerned. So it is a lesson in geopolitics and geostrategic movement. So whilst you may be looking at the region as a whole, you notice that the region may move in a strategic manner, and in this case, it's strategic neutrality. But at the same time, when you look at how individual countries may be reacting, some countries are, the doors are not closed to the Russians entirely for some of these countries. So I'm not sure whether I've answered your question as far as that is concerned, but there's still continued engagement with Russia in various areas. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
One last question. Roberta from Italy, another Italian question.
First of all, thank you for the lectures. It was really interesting and gives us a very interesting perspective on Asia. My question is, as an European, the first question that comes to my mind is looking at how ASEAN has grown as an organization and evolved so rapidly. Is there something that European Union can learn from ASEAN, in your opinion?
Okay, that's a great question actually, but the answer actually lies in the fact because of history. Well, I'm not a specialist in European history, but I believe probably the European continent is much more harmonized, much more, they've got a more common history and perhaps the cultural, sorry?
And more wars.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that is quite true. So
Sorry.
compare that to our region. So our region, which is the ASEAN region, started in 1967. At that time, it's really in the height of the Cold War, and there's a lot of tension among us. And if you were to look at our countries closely, you notice we got countries which are communist. We got kingdoms. We've got democracy, but it could be constitutional, monarchical democracy. We've got and each of the countries are so diversified, also not just from the political system, but also from the cultural roots, right? So, and there are people who are coming from so many different areas in the region. Just take, for example, Indonesia has got something like 300 ethnic groups. 300. That's just amazing. And it's an archipelago, so about 27,000 islands in the region. And you have Papua. The region as a whole is very diversified. And then the religion, it's not Judeo-Christianity. It's so you have Islam, which is, you have the influence of Islam, you have the influence of Hinduism, you have the influence of Buddhism, you have Catholics, and you have animism, because there's also a lot of natives, and so it's so highly diversified. So the way the countries approached there was they didn't go straight away into a common union because it's just simply not possible for them to agree. Because they just don't have this homogeneity and coherence in philosophy, political system, which probably the Europeans may have, which could enable them to consider a union, a custom union, as opposed to us, which is basically just 10 different countries. In fact, we started with 5 countries, 5 different countries first. And it's not even a partnership, In business term, it's called it's basically called separate accounts. We all had separate accounts, but we are one business. So in other words, we are all, in different base, but we may be having a common dream, but then again, the nightmare is also probably common. So I think, so what lesson could be learned? The situation between ASEAN and the European Union is so different. Yes, we had, and then of course, after the 5 founding members, we got another 5 more joining us. But it's also purely circumstantial because when the 5 joined, these are some of the bigger countries, and then the others coming in was also partly because they were, the tensions between the Cold War was simmering down, and there's a need to develop, and there's a need for economy to come up. And likewise too, when Timor-Leste come on board as an 11th country, and as you know, Timor-Leste got their independence not so long ago, and so economic development was one of the driving forces here. Even though initially when they started, it was purely for political security. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure about the European Union side, but the other thing which might be very different in ASEAN is it is quite true we have not fought wars among each other. We have had conflicts with the European colonial masters at that point in time. But we are also divided. When I look at the countries historically, a lot of them are many of them, maybe with the exception of Thailand, and they were under colonial. They were once European colonies, and part of the strategy for the colonial masters in rearranging to so-called rearranging the strategy of controlling the region is to divide the country. So there could be strategic reasons why this could have been done, and because of that, for the 10 countries to come together immediately, it's not easy, and which is why we have this arrangement, which is basically a so-called separate accounts arrangement in terms of business context. And it is only after the suspicion has all gone down, that's when we started talking about economic community. And that came only in 2015. That's, that's almost like 30 years later. Yeah, 30, 40 years later. And so the work on developing this economic community is a very recent structure. I'm not sure whether I could offer any advice. Probably not able to, because our region is just so different. Yeah, it's very different.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Looi. If you don't mind, we are going to take a picture with Mr. Looi. You don't mind, Mr. Looi?
Yes, please. I look forward to that.
We have to find a way of sending you the pictures, because it's the second time we took pictures. All of you that you want. If you don't want, it's up to you. It's up to you. You decide. Okay. Decide. But you have to use your mobile. Mine is very different.